Welcome to our webinar series for professionals.
Okay, so I'll just do the introduction here on 16th of March, 2023. Spring is arriving in Europe. We can sense, maybe not by the temperature, but anyway. So, I'm especially excited about the topic today, which is organic acid testing with the focus on mold and oxalate and clostridia. And the reason for picking this focus is really for you to see the difference between the different organic acid tests we have, and like for you to evaluate which of the tests would be best for the specific patient case that you are sitting with. So I'm excited to hear Jasmine Brown's presentation in a few minutes. So anyway, I'm Anne-Catherine, co-founder of Nordic Laboratories and DNA Life. And those of you who have followed us for a long time know that we are dedicated to change healthcare through functional medicine, personalized medicine, lifestyle medicine, etc. And the OAT test that we are discussing today, together with, I'm sure we're going to talk about, or at least mucotox test is going to be mentioned as well. Of course, you can get that in your VMS profile, together with other tests and supplements. So there may be some relevant supplements that Dr. Brown is mentioning, and you might be able to find it in VMS. Sometimes we share some of the products that are being mentioned just for the ease of you to look into them and investigate them a little bit further. So I just want to make a few notices here. So we actually have several webinars planned over the next couple of months. We're going to do a follow-up on neurotransmitter testing, and then we're going to do a webinar on heavy metal testing, like with hair and urinary toxic tests. And then I'm in the planning, and I think we're going to have, I'm pretty 95% certain that we're going to have Carrie Jones on for a webinar on the Dutch test. I'm sure you all would like to see her again. But that's actually a teaser, because those of you who like traveling, then she will be in Dubai with us, where we have a DNA Live event on the 12th to the 14th of May. So you might want to put in the dates if Dubai, if you're just in the area on those dates. So, but that's an in-person event. So, and that's going to be really good. We just had one in London and it was excellent, we think. And the feedback has been really, really good. So join us in Dubai if you love traveling. So anyway, I'm gonna introduce Jasmine now, Dr. Jasmine Brown. She is a naturopathic doctor from Bridgeport College of Naturopathic Medicine from 2017. And she's able to interpret all functional tests in a clinical manner. And she's a bit of a detective, because identifying biochemical pathways within the body and how the nutrition and lifestyle impacts them is just what she loves doing. So, and then now she's working for Great Plains Laboratories as a support person and an educator for them. So I'm very excited to, Jasmine, listen to you and hear your presentation. And as always, put your questions or comments or what have you in the chat box. Then I will either reply them or I will take note of them. And then at the end, we'll do Q&A. And we are recording as usual. We will share the recording and we will share the slides when we send out the recording. So Jasmine, it's your stage now, and I'll mute myself.
All right, well, thank you for that introduction. All right, so let me share my screen really quick. Okay, I'm gonna hide the video. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining me today. Thank you for having me be able to present to you guys. I'm really excited. This is probably my favorite test that we offer, and definitely one of my favorite topics to present on. So I'm really excited to get into the Great Plains Laboratory Organic Acid Test. As stated, I am a naturopathic doctor and I have been a clinical educator with the lab for 3 years. And it's my job to speak with practitioners and help you all understand what your labs are saying and how that relates to the client that we're talking about. And let me know if at any point you can't hear me or something, okay? All right, so today's objectives, we're going to first be kind of looking at who could actually benefit from this profile. We're going to talk about some common conditions supported by the OAT and what I commonly see. Then I'll dive into the analytes that we're measuring. And then towards the end, we'll kind of connect these to other profiles that we offer that you might consider testing as well. Okay, so who would actually benefit from doing this test? Well, kind of an overview of the organic acid test is that it provides us with useful information about how an individual's body is functioning on a metabolic level. So if there's imbalances revealed, then we can understand by what's imbalanced, how imbalanced it is, how this is affecting someone's associated symptoms, and then support their health overall. Now, common symptoms and disease processes I see that are affected by nutritional deficiencies or other metabolic imbalance are things like anxiety, depression, other mental health complaints, obesity, insulin resistance, fatigue, chronic pain. I'll see autistic children and adults. I'll see ADHD, OCD. Less commonly, but still very helpful, I see a lot of dermatologic conditions, so lots of eczema, acne, even alopecia as seem to be well supported with this profile. So a wide range of symptoms, disease processes can be supported, and just kind of keeping in mind that this is a overall functionality test. So really whatever you're dealing with, even if it's like a normal life change like menopause, you can still kind of figure out how the body's being affected and how it can actually support functionality to help them through this phase of life. Okay, so where did testing for organic acids actually come from? Well, first, organic acids are carbon-based acid byproducts created by humans, bacteria, and fungi. These are byproducts of your metabolism. So just your normal biochemical processes have end products that are produced, and in certain elevations or depressions, I might be seeing signs of nutritional deficiency, inflammatory responses, toxicity, or anything related to imbalances in neurotransmitters, depending on what we're seeing. This type of testing came about actually from the newborn screening test. So if you have children or you work with children, you know that infants get that heel prick at birth. And what's being tested are these organic acids in blood to help us rule out rare inborn errors of metabolism that, when untreated, those organic acids build up to toxic levels, leading to things like poor feeding, seizures, little to no weight gain, nausea, vomiting, chronic illness, and in some cases, death. Uh, Examples of those are maple syrup urine disease or PKU. So that's really where this whole idea of testing these acids came about. So key areas that our test highlights are gut health, mitochondrial health, neurotransmitter status, detoxification, and the breakdown of macronutrients and your nutritional status. The sections that we're looking at, first we look at the intestinal microbial overgrowth. We then identify oxalate burden. We're then looking at glycolytic and mitochondrial functionality, neurotransmitters. We look at pyrimidines, which helps us look at the folate metabolism and usage, and then also fatty acid processing. Then we get into those nutritional markers. We then look at indicators of detoxification, and then our test ends with amino acid metabolites. Those are the ones that are related to the genetic disorders I mentioned. Okay, so let's jump into the report and highlight key analytes that we're measuring. So like I stated, the first section is that intestinal microbial overgrowth. That whole first page of your organic acid test is related to the intestinal tract. Now, this isn't, just the large intestine or just the small intestine. It's the intestinal tract as a whole. And the beauty of our test is that we have some specific fungal markers, specific marker, there's a specific analyte to Candida. There are multiple analytes that are specific to Aspergillus. And then there is one that's specific to a mold called Fusarium. So it's really helpful because it gives you an understanding of growth and proliferation within the GI tracts of these organisms. We also have a non-specific bacterial section. And then another section I like to highlight is our Clostridia section. This is very specific as only Clostridia toxins are actually making these analytes. So this is the top of the first page. This is your yeast and fungal markers. As you can see, there's orange tags under certain markers. These are the ones that are going to be related to the growth of Aspergillus or Fusarium, depending on the marker. And then this one doesn't have a tag, but always remember number 7, arabinose. That's specific to Candida yeast growth. So if you don't look at any other marker on this page, this is the one that you definitely want to draw your eyes to because of its specificity to Candida. Okay, and in this example, this is a pretty severe elevation. Okay, so because we're looking at mold growth on the OAT, it's going to be important to understand toxic load as well. And that's where our mycotox urine profile comes into play. These tests are actually very complementary to one another and are practical to run simultaneously. The reason why it's practical to run these together is one, they use the same urine sample, so it's easy collection for your clients. 2, it gives you information about mold that the other tests can't give you. So the mycotox is telling you what toxins am I dealing with in this client? Are we just dealing with some common, like Aspergillus penicillium toxins, or are we dealing with more nasty Stachybotrys chaetomium toxins? That also helps you to determine, are they still living in their environment or working in their environment or exposed in some way, shape, or form? That also helps you decide, well, what binders, what detox measures are going to be most suited towards this profile of toxin excretion. What that test can't tell you is, are they colonized? Does their body, their gut, have a profile that is promoting the growth of Aspergillus or Fusarium? Now, the OAT does. It tells you that. It says, hey, yes or no, Aspergillus is growing, Fusarium is growing. We need to kill these fungi. What the OAT doesn't do, unfortunately, is it doesn't tell you about other molds. It just tells you Aspergillus and Fusarium. And I point this out because there's another very common mold called penicillium that if you just do an OAT, you're not getting any information about that. So it's always practical to do them both if you're thinking about mold for that client. Plus, it gives you all the information you need right away. I've seen too many times where people are running OAT or a mycotox first, and then they're waiting another, 2 weeks to see their clients, a week for them to collect their sample, and then a week to get the results back. And by that time, you've wasted 4 weeks. Okay. So always run those together if you're thinking mold. Now, this is a study done by Dr. Shaw. It was done in 2019 to look at the relationship between urine mycotoxins and the organic acids related to mold. And as you can see from these different graphs, the organic acids here, these furan compounds that are related to mold, When the mycotoxin exposure was negative, there was very low or none at all of these organic acid tests. Versus when mycotoxins were positive, we were seeing a lot of these or more prevalent amounts of these organic acids showing that connection. And as you can see here, these are the different mycotoxins that we're seeing. Ochre toxin being the most significant, and that one actually being very common what you'll see when you run that test. And then this is looking at the relationship between the mycotoxins and that tricarballelic from Fusarium. Okay, so this is our bacterial section. Remember, this is non-specific. Again, it's not looking at the small intestine or the large intestine. Specifically, it's looking at the gut as a whole. So oftentimes I get questions about SIBO or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Oftentimes I'll get clients that have a lot of GI symptoms and their practitioner asks me, can I rule out SIBO from this test? And unfortunately, you cannot. You would need to do specific SIBO testing to get that answer. But say you have someone who has 0 GI symptoms, but they have a lot of these markers being elevated, that now triggers you as a clinician to say, hey, we need to do a gut treatment and or a stool test so that we can get more information about what exactly is causing this overgrowth and potentially playing a role in your disease process. Excuse me. Okay, so next is our Clostridia section. This is one of my favorite sections on this profile because of its specificity. These are amino acid derived toxins that only come from Clostridia, and we do have a specific Clostridia difficile marker number 17 for cresol. Now, these toxins, like I stated, are produced specifically by Clostridium. They are different though from toxin A, toxin B, toxins that are commonly going to be causing your like chronic diarrhea that, you know, your hospital acquired C. diff type of symptoms. Excuse me. So if you're seeing someone with constipation and they have these Clostridia toxins, that's totally normal. That is actually very common. If you see someone with our Clostridia markers and they have diarrhea, that's kind of a clue. Hey, they are dealing with Clostridia. Let's do further stool testing to see, are they also dealing with these other nasty toxins that are causing their diarrhea? So you want to definitely look at symptoms to determine if you need to do that further testing, but don't be surprised if you don't see diarrhea with just the toxins that we're looking for. And the reason why, these are more related to the neurologic system because of the amino acids that they come from. Okay. So those Clostridia specific toxins are derived from the metabolism of phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan. Okay, so basically the Clostridia takes all of the amino acids that you're eating and produces its toxin. And sometimes what you'll see in individuals is actually they'll unintentionally either stop eating. So you might see this in like an anorexic patient or a patient with an eating, with disordered eating. Or you may see someone who says, I just feel better off of animal protein. They don't know why. They just know that if they eat meat, they feel worse. And then you find out they're full of Clostridia. And it's because those organisms are metabolizing the amino acids that they're eating from those protein-rich foods. Now, this is important, and I'll kind of dive into this a little deeper as we move along, but this creates dopamine analogs that block a key enzyme needed for neurotransmitter balance called dopamine beta hydroxylase or DBH. Okay, so you always want to cross-reference your Clostridia markers with your neurotransmitter markers. And again, I'll swing back around to this as we move through the profile. But as you can see here, for cresol, HPHPA, they block this guy. Okay, so that conversion is not happening adequately. Okay, so as we move through their profile, our next section is oxalates. So oxalates are crystal-like structures that are associated with the symptom of pain. And this can be any type of pain. I've seen this with something as common as headaches. I've seen this with children who have stomach pain or vaginal pain or joint pain. Really, any type of pain is associated with these oxalates because they're crystals and they're sharp and they hurt. Um, these are also seen commonly in the autistic population. So this is a really good section to make sure that you're keeping in mind if you're working with uh, those types of patients. We are measuring three metabolites: oxalic acid, glycolic acid, and glyceric. And these are important with the other aspects of the test because there is a connection to candida overgrowth. There's a connection to mold exposure. So you might be seeing this because mold is growing. This is also associated with the B6 speed, and this can be a trigger for mitochondrial dysfunction. Okay. Now, how are these things made? Well, their precursors are glyoxylate. This is the main source of oxalate formation. It's derived from amino acids like glycine and also from fungal organisms. So think about that candida, think about that mold. Uh, our body's own lactate dehydrogenase enzyme then takes that and converts it to oxalates. We can also get oxalates from ascorbate or ascorbic acid. So if you have people taking tons of vitamin C, this is actually a problem. And then glycine, about 1% of the glycine pool in the body is converted into oxalates. So it's not a huge source, but it is just something to be aware of. And humans, we can take these and make those oxalates. So that's the real concern, is that our body is getting overloaded and making more of these organic acid byproducts. So this lovely diagram is actually going to be on every single organic acid test that you get, so you don't need to bookmark it or anything. But what it's showing us is that there's an enzyme from candida called isocitrate lyase. So candida has this guy, and it cleaves the isocitrate in the human Krebs cycle and creates glyoxylate. So remember, that's that main precursor to oxalates. And that's where our human LDH acts upon it to create oxalate metabolites. So this is the whole candida conundrum. So if you're seeing candida, you're seeing oxalates, it's a really good chance that this is the main reasoning why your client is dealing with these metabolites. As you can see here to the side, if B6 is in abundance, you're actually going to shunt this away from glyoxylate and increase the conversion of this to glycine. Remember, glycine, only 1% of the glycine in your body is actually turned into oxalates. So it's actually a safer metabolite. Now, I often get questions about low oxalate diets. I rarely recommend them just because they're so restrictive, and a lot of our clients are already coming to us with, very restricted diets. So I try not to restrict more if I don't have to, but you can always reduce those highest oxalate foods. I can remember an example of a 4-year-old who ate a pint of blueberries every single day and was having crazy stomach pain, and oxalates were like 300. So that one was a very clear case that this child is eating way too many blueberries. So we were able to just remove this from the diet, and that child got some much needed relief. But values over 250, consider a low oxalate diet. Definitely keep it in your wheelhouse. And then if symptoms are severe, if people are coming with mild elevations, but they tell you their pain is a 9 out of 10, we need to do some, definitely some more extreme measures to help get them into a stable place. And then remembering your richest foods are going to be things like spinach, berries, soy, chocolate, nuts, and their byproducts. Okay, so next are our glycolytic and mitochondrial analytes that help us to evaluate the use of glucose via glycolysis for ATP production. It also looks at byproducts of the Krebs cycle intermediates. We evaluate how well the body is using amino acids for energy metabolism. And then elevations actually give us insight into dysfunction and the ability of the mitochondria to produce energy. So I always like to remind my clients that enzymes' main goal is to break down a substrate. So if that substrate's building up in your urine, that tells me that enzyme was not working properly for one reason or another, whether that be nutritional deficiency, increased metabolic demand from toxins or oxalates, or gut dysbiosis, or even a genetic issue. That's what I'm looking for here, those elevations telling me about enzyme dysfunction. So that's the section, pretty intense looking section, but really, again, you're looking for those elevations out of that full reference range. So don't let this box confuse you. Okay, a high is actually going to be way out here. It's going to have a red H here, and your value will be in a red diamond. Okay. Now, I do want to highlight the glycolytic cycle, lactic and pyruvic. These markers are really helpful at helping us understand how well is this client utilizing glucose or not. So ideally, we want to see low on these values. That tells me that we're not overly producing lactic acid. We're also readily using pyruvate and converting it into acetyl-CoA so that it can be moved into the Krebs cycle. So kind of a visual of this, glucose uses ATP and NAD to become pyruvate. In times of decreased oxygenation, so think about sleep apnea, asthma, any type of COPD, restricted breathing, anemia, these types of states will lead us down that lactate dehydrogenase pathway, and we'll get a buildup of lactate, thus lactic acid. Well, this process, unfortunately, only nets to ATP. That's only two energy currency molecules that are being produced for all of the work that's being done. When pyruvate, in times of oxygen-rich situations, times of nutritional abundance, we can use pyruvate dehydrogenase, create that acetyl-CoA, be fed into the Krebs cycle, then into the electron transport chain, and we get a net of 32 to 34 ATP. So this is a huge first step at making sure that the glucose that we use is getting into the mitochondria and being used to make the most abundant amount of ATP as possible. Okay, so definitely keep your eye out for those two markers. Now, I do also want to point out succinic. This, if you remember, I said on the first page, you definitely want to look at marker 7. On this page, you want to look at marker 24. Okay, succinic acid is one of my favorite markers because it's produced by from a compound called acetyl-CoA in the Krebs cycle. It's then broken down by succinate dehydrogenase. This enzyme is what converts it to fumarate, that cycle. Well, this enzyme is special because not only is it in the Krebs cycle, it's also in that electron transport chain that nets us 34 ATP. So if this marker is high, right, it's out of that reference range, I know that there are 2 areas of energy production that are compromised. That's a problem for our clients, right? The great thing about it is that we know that chemicals and metals and other toxins directly block the functionality. So whenever you see marker 24 high, test for toxins. Okay. Now it is non-specific, so you can't know, oh, that's chemicals, or oh, that's metals, or oh, that's mold, because it could always be all 3. But I always say at that point, talk to your clients, get to know them, their occupations, their living situations, and what makes sense. And that can help guide you to where you want to go next. Okay, so remember we were talking about that clostridia? Well, this is the next place your eyes should go if you're seeing those clostridia markers, that neurotransmitter section. Remember that this is an overview of neurotransmitter status. We're looking at urinary end products. We look at dopamine and the HVA or homovanillic acid. We're looking at norepinephrine and epinephrine through the VMA or vanilla mandelic acid. We're looking at serotonin via the 5-HIAA or the 5-hydroxyindoleacetic acid. Now, these give you an idea, okay? It's not specific to any one area of the body or of the brain, but it is telling you at the end of the day how much of these are being released. Is it a lot or is it very little? And symptoms in conjunction with the values will help you to determine more of what you're looking at. So for example, you can see, let's say we have, for example, if your HVA, VMA, 5-HIAA are all low, we're thinking, whoa, there's no neurotransmitter here. What's happening? Well, sometimes you'll see that in a very depressed, fatigued person. In that case, they're having trouble making those neurotransmitters, right? You need those neurotransmitters to have that good, happy mood, to have energy. Well, on the other side, sometimes I'll see this in children with ADHD. They can't focus, and it's not that they're not making enough; it's more that they're not breaking it down. So always look at these markers in conjunction with the clinical picture. And then this here, as we move through the test, like on the organic acid test, you'll see this beautiful diagram, and it's showing you how the phenylalanine and tyrosine are used by Clostridia to make these toxins. You can also see that tyrosine becomes dopa and then dopamine. So that makes dopamine, 4-cresol, HPHPA, kind of like cousins, if you will. They're related, but they're not the same. And that relationship gives these Clostridia toxins the ability to irreversibly block receptors on that DBH enzyme. So when that happens, dopamine builds up. You can't produce norepinephrine, epinephrine, so your VMA goes very low. And then the ratio between these things, number 35, will increase. So the higher the ratio, the lower the functionality. Okay, so always keep that in mind, especially if you're dealing with anyone with mental health complaints. So we also look at, we also look at the activity of the COMT enzyme. Remember, this catechol methyltransferase enzyme is what's completely helping us to inactivate our active catecholamines. So that's what's getting them down to that VMA, that HVA. And as you can see here, dopamine becomes DOPAC. DOPAC is acted upon by COMT to make that HVA. So we're looking at that through marker 37, our HVA DOPAC ratio. Okay, so as that ratio decreases, that means DOPAC is rising and not being converted into HVA. So COMT activity is not working, right? Remember, this is a methyltransferase enzyme, so it is methylation dependent. SAMe increases its activity, and other cofactors like lithium and magnesium are helpful here as well. As that activity increases, that means more of your DOPAC is being broken down to HVA. And there's usually a little less dopamine circulating in the system. So that's an increased activity and an upregulation. And in that case, it can be beneficial to do further DNA testing to kind of see what's going on genetically there. At the end of that section, we do take a peek at quinolytic acid and kyurenic acid. These are tryptophan metabolites. These are usually produced when the immune system is activated. So if you're seeing these rise, you know that something's triggering that immune stimulation. Quinolinic is usually stimulated by a viral load, Lyme, some toxic burden, the need for NAD because it's produced when quinolinic is made, and usually many inflammatory processes. Now, this is neurotoxic, so it is important to keep your eye out for this one in any neurologic complaint. Common symptoms that I see are anxiety and insomnia with quinolinic. Now, chimeric is also elevated for similar reasons. This one's a little safer, if you will, because it's more neuroprotective. So if you're seeing more chimeric than quinolinic, you're usually in a better situation. But this is stimulated during times of inflammation and usually elevated when there's a need for more B6. Okay, so next we're going to talk about ketones and fatty acids. This section looks at ketones and markers 43 and 44. Now remember, these are byproducts of beta oxidation, or this is telling me that the body is burning fat for energy. Beta oxidation is the primary, most efficient process for fatty acid oxidation. It occurs inside of the mitochondria and helps us to easily metabolize short chain fatty acids. Now, long chain, medium chain triglycerides actually require L-carnitine for the carnitine shuttle so that they can go into the mitochondria to be used for beta oxidation. So that's why carnitine is usually a big support here for this section. It is upregulated in fasting states, ketosis, low carb diet, calorie deficit, diabetes, uncontrolled, chronic diarrhea, vomiting, and large chronic fungal overgrowths. And this is because these states are encouraging fat burn. So if you have someone on a low carb diet or someone who is purposefully in ketosis, this is actually okay to see these high. It actually can be a really good way to double check someone who tells you they're following a keto diet, make sure that they're actually getting into ketosis. But if they're not, then you're looking more of, are you eating enough? Are you processing your sugar correctly? Are you purging? Or do you potentially have a large like candida or mold overgrowth? Now, the other markers here, 45 through 49, are what's called dicarboxylic acids. And these are metabolites of a secondary process called omega fatty acid oxidation. So that's that process that you use when you don't have enough carnitine to get into that mitochondria space for beta oxidation. This is a less efficient process and usually tells me, hey, there's a need for carnitine. There's some mitochondrial dysfunction that's making this person unable to properly use fatty acids for energy. So that's kind of how it links to that mitochondrial function. And as stated, it can be influenced by diet. So make sure you have a diet diary for your client when you're doing this test. And this is just an example of the section. And I just want to highlight that those two guys are your ketones. Okay, so our nutritional analytes. So in our pyrimidine section, these are the uracil, thiamine, and are related to RNA and DNA synthesis, which is folate dependent. So when these are high in the urine, that tells me something's happening where these were not properly incorporated into DNA or RNA, and folate is needed. Vitamin B12 is looked at is assessed by the methylmalonic acid. B6, we're looking at directly, same as B5. B2 is looked at via glutaric acid. Vitamin C is looked at directly. We're also assessing for CoQ10, NAC, and also biotin. Now, as you can see, some of these markers have an asterisk, and I'll show you here these markers with an asterisk. We're not directly looking at B12, B2, CoQ10, or biotin in the urine. We're actually looking at a metabolic byproduct that is either broken down by an enzyme that requires that nutrient, or like with CoQ10, I'm going to highlight that one in particular. This 3-hydroxy-3-methylglutaric is code name, if you will, for HMG-CoA. And if you're familiar with statin drugs, we know that HMG-CoA reductase is what is blocked in order to stop the synthesis of cholesterol. Well, it's also the same enzyme needed to make CoQ10. So when this guy rises, I know that something's off with that enzyme and that we're not properly making CoQ10. Okay, so takeaway from this slide here, always remember a high value for the markers with the asterisk may indicate a deficiency. Okay, and this isn't, these asterisks are always there. Okay, and it's more of if it's high. Okay. Now, kind of going back to that CoQ10, remember that HMG-CoA reductase enzyme that helps us to take the HMG-CoA and convert it where it's going to become cholesterol and CoQ10. So if this is rising in number 55 on the OAT, then we know we're not converting it, right? So we know the downstream byproducts are not being produced. Now, if you're taking a statin, this is kind of the point, right? We're trying to stop you from making so much cholesterol. But if you're not, or especially in children, if there's something going on with this enzyme and you're not making CoQ10, there's a suspicion you're not making cholesterol as well. And this is seen commonly in speech delay. We see it in autism, and we also see it in highly aggressive individuals. So it's definitely something to look at cholesterol levels whenever you see a high 55 or CoQ10 marker. Okay, so the next section, this is actually another one of my favorite sections, the indicators of detoxification. This section is wonderful because it can tell me how well, no matter what someone's toxic burden is, how well are you handling it, right? Are you completely deficient in glutathione? That's something we can understand from the pyroglutamic acid. When that one's high, that means that there's a high need for glutathione. I can also get understanding about how well are you methylating, right? This 2-hydroxybutyric acid is the one that's going to help me understand your methylation status or need to check into your methylation status and potential for toxic burden. Orotic acid helps me understand how well you're processing ammonia. And 2-hydroxyhippuric acid, this is produced when we have GI bacterial growth. So it can pair really well with the bacterial section on page 1. It's also elevated in presence of aspartame and salicylates. Salicylates including aspirin and foods. So if someone's having issues with salicylates, you might see this high. So this is what that section looks like. Again, 58 has that asterisk. So when this goes high, there's a deficiency, potentially of glutathione. And then 59, when this one increases, we're thinking there's a methylation issue and or a toxic exposure. Now I'll kind of show you. 2-hydroxybutyric acid is only produced when homocysteine goes down this transsulfuration pathway and produces cysteine. Okay, so when you see this high, you know homocysteine is being broken down. Why is the question? So you always want to follow up with the homocysteine value, because if it's high, we know we're not methylating, right? We're not getting that methylfolate, that methyl B12. We might need some SAMe and other things. But if it's low, like, 3, now we're thinking, whoa, we're breaking down a lot of this, right? This is more related to a toxic burden. Okay, your body's trying to use this internal source of cysteine to make glutathione. And in that case, you want to, go further with like toxic testing. Okay, so the last section on the OAT are the amino acid metabolites. Now, this is a section that is that original newborn screening test, right? This is what we're still using today in that infant heel prick. These look at inborn errors of metabolism and elevations, especially significant, like in the hundreds elevations, are usually consistent with genetic dysfunction. Some medications can cause those depending on the client. Now, I want you to remember this is not a measure of protein intake or digestion capacity, okay? We are not looking at how well you can break down your protein or how much you're eating. You can see low values in vegans, vegetarians, carnivores, and omnivores. And that's again because we're looking at genetically encoded enzymes to break down amino acids and use them properly. Slight elevations in some cases, depending on what's elevated, is related to nutrient need, but these aren't ones you're always going to see. Now, some common questions that I get, can you use the OAT for a screening test for mold? You cannot. Okay, you can have a completely normal oat and still have mycotoxins. So that's again why you want to do them together. We kind of talked about this. Are the clostridia markers specific to toxigenic C. diff? No, you have to do a specific C. diff toxin A, toxin B test. And again, you'd only do that if you have like diarrhea. I get to the mitochondrial markers evaluate any specific area of the body. They do not, but you always want to think about mitochondrial rich areas. So the nervous system, the heart, the muscles, you want to make sure that those are kind of your focuses as you are looking at that section. Kind of the same thing here where I get a question, where are the neurotransmitters being measured? Again, same thing, because it's the urine, it's really anywhere. It's more of an overall status for those markers. And then this is what I get almost every day. Why are the elevations on the mycotoxin not on the oats? And again, this is looking at two different aspects of mold exposure. One's looking at growth, one's looking at toxin excretion. And then also the mycotox does look at more toxins from different molds than the oat. And then as we just discussed, the amino acid section does not tell you about protein status, okay? All right, so let's kind of end things talking about other profiles you can consider. The mycotox, the GPL tox, the glyphosate test. If you have elevated mold markers, oxalates, in the absence of candida. And remember, it's also done best at the same time as the oat. The GPL tox, if 24, that succinic acid is elevated, you'll want to go for this chemical profile because they block that enzyme. Same thing with glyphosate. It can block it as well. You also want to consider glyphosate if you've done like 2 or 3 oats and you still have clostridia. Glyphosate makes it really easy for clostridia to grow because it's imbalancing the gut flora. You also want to consider heavy metals, the DNA methylation panel. Heavy metals, if marker 24 is elevated, and the DNA methylation, if 59, that 2-hydroxybutyric is elevated because impaired methylation will increase it. That can help pinpoint how you can best support this person. Also, if you see that there's an issue with the COMT marker, number 37, this panel does look at those SNPs as well. So that's a good one there. So our key takeaways, the oat is beneficial for any chronic disease process. Various symptoms or diseases can be supported. And the carbon markers, again, intestinal overgrowth, oxalates, mitochondria, neurotransmitters, detox, and nutrition. And then those tests that we just discussed, those are ones to always kind of keep in your wheelhouse to make sure that you are properly following up and able to remove those body burdens for your client. All right, so what questions do we have? I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much so far. Now, there were some questions, and here we're going back to the oxalate markers. Okay. Maybe more into like now we have a naturopathic doctor that we can pick your brain. So now we're going to dive a little bit more into the clinical side. So now you said very clearly that if one of the oxalate markers is higher than 250, I can't remember which one of them, you would definitely say, well, cut down on oxalate in the food. But if it wasn't that high, you would then support with B6 and zinc or other things that you also mentioned the candida. So just a little bit like what's the clinical side here that we should focus on?
Yeah, so if you see high oxalates and you're trying to figure out that underlying like issue, why do you have high oxalates? When first look at their diet, some people are just overdoing them. But the B6, also with meals, calcium, magnesium citrate, those minerals bind up dietary oxalates and help them to basically not be absorbed. So you just pass them in a stool. Epsom salt baths are also good options to help with the clearance of oxalates.
Okay. So B6 and then minerals during the meal and possibly low or reduced oxalates in diet. Then a question came up, like if glyphosate could influence the oxalate markers.
Kind of in a roundabout way, like it could. Kind of like because of its effect on the good bacteria. If we're killing all of the good bacteria and we're opening up an opportunity for opportunistic candida or mold to grow and proliferate, then we're kind of opening up that space for oxalates to be produced in abundance.
Cool. So more like an indirect thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then we had a question now. Do you know what marker 43 is? Because one is asking if high marker 43 can lead to weight loss in a client with chronic diarrhea. We know chronic diarrhea in itself probably can lead to weight loss, but is there something on what is marker 43? I don't remember it off by heart. But
yeah, so 43 is a ketone. So that tells us fat's being burned. So yeah, you could see weight loss.
Cool. And then one asked, and which is again going back to the oxalate, like if you take glycine as a supplement, then is it that would be contraindicative if you have someone with high oxalate, or is the conversion so low that it's probably better doing glycine because it has so many like calming effects and detoxification effects, etc. in the system?
Yeah, so I don't get this question a lot, but if it's going to benefit the client, give it, but I would just make sure you're giving it with B6 because then you're reducing how much of that is actually being converted to the glyoxylate. Here, I'll go back to that diagram really quick just because I think it does a good job of depicting it. Hold on, guys. Let me go back. Oh, sorry. Share. Let's see, where is that one? Yeah, here we go. So if you give glycine and you're not giving B6, then you might be feeding that pathway, right? So just give the B6 and you should be more than fine.
Cool. And what about, that's actually me asking here, what about collagen? Because we know oxalate can be a byproduct from collagen metabolism, but how about eating collagen as a food or as a supplement?
I wouldn't recommend overdoing like collagen supplements or like just drinking bone broth. If you're cooking with it or, eating things that have a decent amount of collagen, it shouldn't be too big of an issue. I find it more when you're overdoing those things or doing actual supplement to be more of a problem, but you'll always want to gauge like your client, right? If they're in severe pain, take it all away. But if it's, they're still able to do their activities of daily living, just take away supplements kind of thing.
Okay. So food first.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what is the interaction between B1 thiamine and oxalates? I can understand that B1 can significantly help with the pain from oxalate crystals. Is Afifa asking?
Hold on, let me see if I can find that one.
Well, I don't know what time you're on, but I'm 16:54, so the minute
Okay.
is 4. You need to.
So I've heard that B1 can help the pain. I'm not sure the mechanism though. Honestly, that would be something I'd have to review.
Fair enough. And then I have one where I need your help as well. If marker 7, that's just after that. If marker 75 is over the norm and 72 is on the edge of the high, what should I pay attention to?
Let me pull up I don't have those ones memorized. Hold on, let me just see which ones we're actually looking at. It's like I can see them, but I can't see the names. You said 75 and 72.
75 is over the norm and 72 is on the edge. So I guess both a pattern of a little bit high.
Okay, so 72, this one's related to the processing of tyrosine. So sometimes what we'll see is like high clostridia markers or high neurotransmitters, and that's just increased processing of that amino acid. So you'll see decreased or a little decompensation because you're just kind of overworking that metabolic process. Sometimes I'll see that though also with a need for BH4 or biopterin. I don't see it all the time, but that can be supported or supportive here. And then 75, is this like severely elevated or slightly elevated?
Just over the normal. Yeah, I don't know. You can interpret for you.
Yeah, so if it's significantly elevated, then you might be looking at, for hydroxy butyric aciduria. You might need to do some genetic testing. If it's slightly over the norm, it's not really anything clinically relevant. So like some of these can fluctuate without rhyme or reason, and that's one of those ones that will just fluctuate. So I usually don't give it too much concern. And oftentimes a lot of these, because they're encoded by our genetics, if we can fix some other things and take the stress off of the genetic code, you'll see these start to function a lot better.
So when you say take the stress off the genetic code,
yeah, so
what are we talking about? Lifestyle changes or meditation?
Yeah, lifestyle changes, figure out what's causing mitochondrial dysfunction. Is it the gut? Is it toxins? Is it, you sit on your couch all day? Are you overly stressed? So removing those barriers to heal are what's gonna, take that stress off of our genetics, that kind of epigenetic phenomenon.
And then Clostridia. This is the one I kind of want to finish off with, because then there's markers of Clostridia. Then you would also do like a supportive, like of a stool test to see if there's something there. But I know when we were in Stockholm, we had a group up and doing some education. And I know that just even using herbal supplements for treating Clostridia was recommended there. So if you have indicative markers saying that there possibly could be some Clostridia here, would you then, based on an organic acid, choose some herbal supplements to treat the Clostridia with, or would you purely only do it if you have a stool test as well?
No, so I would definitely go ahead and treat with herbs. The only time that I would be more pushing a stool test is if there's like chronic diarrhea, because at that point I need to know if this is toxic. C. diff. We probably wouldn't use an antibiotic at that point, and I rarely push for antibiotics. But if someone's having this regular chronic diarrhea, then it might be warranted, but if it's, not that picture and you have high clostridia, herbs are great. Oregano works really well. If you're familiar with biocidin, that works well. And then spore-based probiotics or Saccharomyces will already work really well too.
So that we've got all that in the system. So for those of you who's using the VMS for supplements, then the biocidin is there both in drops and in capsules. And spore biotics is there for the spore-based bacteria. And of course, Saccharomyces is there as well. I have personally had a few patients with Clostridia based on organic acid testing, where when doing following up tests, we can see that such a strategy or treatment actually has worked. And here I've got at least 2 kids and an adult that I can remember right now for sure, where we were able to do follow-up tests, because not always that patient wants to spend money on doing follow-up tests. So, but thank you for sharing that for sure as well. So I think we'll finish now. And reach out if you have further questions. And just one question is coming up, because I think it's quite in. So the marker you have for serotonin, the 5-HIA marker. So there's a dopamine marker and the serotonin marker. And then the question, like, would you recommend amino acids? So it would be tyrosine for the dopamine marker, and it would be 5-HTP or tryptophan for the serotonin marker.
So I would recommend the tyrosine for the dopamine marker. If it's serotonin, I don't recommend tryptophan, mainly because there's that very high potential it's going to be turned into quinolinic acid, and that's more neurotoxic. So I always recommend, if you're going to support, do 5-HTP.
Thank you for that clinical pearl. So nice to exactly hear those things from different practitioners.
Yeah, it's kind of a toss-up when you give tryptophan. It can go one way or the other, and I'd rather it go the good way. So 5-HTP.
Super cool. Dr. Jasmine Brown, it has been a pleasure spending the last hour with you. I will try and invite you back for sure.
Yeah.
See what happens. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We've got most still live there, so thank you all. And thank you for chatting in the chat box and showing your face on the screen. See you soon, hopefully, at the next events. We will send invites out, and of course we will send the recording and the slides out for this one as well. See you next time. Bye.
If you do not already have an account with us, please contact our team and we will assist you. If you found this webinar helpful, please like and subscribe to our channel.